And welcome everybody to another episode of MaiestasHaven Visual Records. I am your co-host, Satsuki Shizuka, and filming of course is proliferation, the administrator and now world leader of our proud MaiestasHaven nation.
Hello.
So, proliferation. Our first episode, just like our city, didn't exactly start off with the greatest rounds, so the recording went all over the place for my audio. And, yeah. So, I suppose that's actually one of the facts of nature we need to deal with, is that we didn't start our first episode on the first day of the city, actually, and we were holding off on ourselves because we thought like, how are we able to show off all of these social systems and ideas that we have if we don't even have them in place? So, what day are we on right now, and how long did it take for us to have this kind of city right now, just to recap?
Well, as far as I remember, it's now actually day 15, which means that we're about 2 weeks in, and as you might have seen from the surroundings, it's actually quite a little bit more developed. There's more buildings up, there's even a little fountain here, and all around we've been busy the last week, and can't wait what next week will be.
So roughly, our town is what level now? We have some early steel production.
As you can see, we have vehicles now. In the background, there's also my little cube, which has been the recently moved mechanics workshop. And we've also briefly stinted into industry with a custom modded electric furnace. And we're basically industrializing right now.
And in feature of some new mods, we can see that there is this arched gate over here by the clock tower.
That's actually by Kai, and I'm quite fond of it. I do have a little bit of preference for stone and somewhat of a dwarven vibe, so it definitely fits.
So yes, we're roughly in the early steel or late iron age right now, and this is often the considered the golden age of eco-society. And today I would like to talk to you about what happens with a growing society like this. How do new players join and make themselves still feel useful, as well as how administrators of societies like these deal with new social and economic trends. As your master of coin in this nation, naturally my specialty is dealing with banking systems and finances in a society like this. There's a lot of fun that you can actually do with eco that might not come at first to most people when you just start seeing what kind of tools and resources that you can do with money. So let's give a slight rundown of what we do on this server. Pray if you would like to take a look at our current. So in our society, we have now 2 currencies. First of all is the larger number in circulation one, called the Minori, which we started off with, unfortunately, with a spawned-in mint, so that everyone worked with a standard currency in the beginning. And you can see that it's made out of wood chips, or wood pulp, which was a pretty common and relatively widely available piece that grew as long as we continued making wood, logs, and lumber. The second currency we have here is made out of paper, and it's called the Tongbao. Now, why exactly did we have the Tongbao? Pray if you want to talk about the history of the regal.
Yeah, so because of previously we had the Regal, which I named, but this time because Satsuki was still the world leader at the time, she named it Tongbao. Basically, the main difference we found is that while it is workable to have a single currency and the Minori in our case, it does have its limitations in terms of money circulation and also having to deal with large numbers, especially with early adoption of things like trucks or steam trucks in our case this time. And yeah, it also allows us to be a little bit more flexible in how tax works and also enables something like a financial product like we have with our second currency currently.
So I suppose it would be nice to talk about why we like to have a second currency and what's with the big deal about big numbers. So on our server, we've set basically a price for logs, stone, and basic foodstuffs. So for example, one tomato or one wheat. And that is the standard pricing for which everything else would then subsequently be priced at, because these are the basic resources, the basic building blocks. And at first, we set our single unit, such as the Minori now, to 1 unit of Minori equals to 1 log or 1 stone. Later on, when we have things like price discounts, wars, or price wars, taxes, and otherwise things like discount, like efficiencies and cutting costs and so forth, you'll find that a lot of decimals start taking up in place. It is possible for eco to accept decimal places for prices. However, a user has to manually type in that decimal point and whatever comes after that. The standard plus minus buttons on the shop page can only do standard integers. It is to that end that we decided if we want to use the integers function of the store page more often, we would have to increase the denominations of the currency. That's why beginning in this round, or was it last round, that we decided to take the Minori and times everything by 10.
That was last round.
And one of the other problems we discovered from that is, last round, I believe, one wood pulp generated 20 Minori. And in the end, we ran out of Minori to represent the economy, and a lot of people were having trouble doing proper transactions.
Yeah, I do remember. It was, yeah, not a pleasant experience.
So this kind of economic phenomenon is usually called deflation. And, well, the lack of currency to represent any trade, really, in society. And compared to what most people in other servers talk about in terms of money crises, such as having way too much money in the economy and inflation happens, deflation can literally stop every trade in its tracks. And that could be quite the problem. So beginning in this round, we began printing the Minori to 1 wood pulp species to 100 Minori, and still we found that by day 5 or 7, when we started having roads, as you can see here, and people started trading processed goods like mortared stone we see under our feet, or perhaps bricks that you now see on as the roof of the gatehouse, the transactions started getting relatively large in number. Say, for example, that you have a block of clay worth roughly the same value as a block of stone, so 30 or 40 Minori. A cart, a wooden cart, which could carry around 220 of those, times 40, is already a 5-digit figure. So needless to say, when you start dealing with a full cartload of bricks, you would be dealing in rather substantial amounts of money. And once you have enough of those trades happening, it's obvious to see that even when we're printing at 1 to 100 in terms of Minori, it would take a lot of wood pulp for everyone to have sufficient money supply. Now, if we also include things like people wanting to save up Minori to buy something bigger, say this steam truck we have here, let's just say that gets ugly. How much is a steam truck worth a Minori anyway, Prefector?
Well, currently, because I have Mechanics 5 as of last night, it's actually about half what it used to be at introduction, but suffice to say it's now 50k up just about, with my margin taken into account, because, well, I do need to invest quite a bit in building materials and also...
Everyone has to start off from somewhere, Frey. What was the starting price you had to... What was the price of this truck when you first made the first...
It was actually in the 100k range.
And how hard is it exactly on our server to earn 180k Minori?
Yeah, quite a bit actually, because, well, you do...
In fact, actually, who owns actually 180k Minori on our server right now? So if we take a look at the Minori report, I'm seeing that most people actually don't even have more than a 5-digit figure. Stoneman owns around roughly 165k, and he's been diligently selling logs to me. So a truck is actually worth quite a bit on our server right now. So imagine if there is a server of around 20-25 active people, and each truck costs roughly 180k Minori. How many Minori does that take in order for people to, say, fairly be able to get the money that they need to scrounge up to afford one of these trucks?
Yeah, I think they'll...
Yeah, that's a lot.
For a long time.
So, if you don't want to print that much money or spend that much resources to just print cash, because you do lose that species, yeah, in the end, we needed a better solution. That's why, on our server, we decided to take up a second currency that would represent more of the value, but with less amounts of species involved. So, since we used wood pulp as our first primitive currency, it seemed natural for us to use paper as the second currency, much like in the real world today. And the next problem when you wanted to create a new currency would be to adopt the currency. Like, would people actually buy into this higher value currency? How do you convert that currency, and at what rate? These are some of the questions that the administrators have to decide on. In order to get two currencies going, there are some basic infrastructure you must have. Why don't we go take a look at the bank? Yeah, you know what? Before that, let's hitch a ride on your truck. Because we have a truck now. And that's cool. So yes, we are 9.0 compliant in that we now have government buildings, and soon enough they will be actually not be owned by anybody, nor will they actually need claims. The government can actually take care of everything. So as you can see here now, we now have 2 mints. The one on my left, or on your right, is the Minori, and the second one we have here is now actually made by our smith, and actually prints the 通宝. I have authorized you to take a look at it. So yes, the 通宝 is a second kind of currency, and it functions just like the first one. Technically, there is no relation between the two of them, unless someone actually makes a relation out of it. So since I'm the one who printed the second currency, I also have to draw some kind of relationship between the two of them. So the next step comes into place with the currency exchange, which I place here because I was running out of space in the bank. This is the currency exchange function, or the currency exchange booth that you can find. In the original intention, SLG or Strange Loop Games probably wanted us that if we are to have multiple societies and with multiple currencies, that we would eventually have to trade with each other, and there would have to be some way of calculating what each currency stood for in each other's terms. And for this kind of exchange, the owner of this currency exchange has to set a value for what X currency equals to and Y currency. When you have both currencies under the control of one central authority or one central bank, it gets easy because there's technically no floating rate. One can very reliably say that one tongbao means 10 minori, as you can see here. And if the owner of the bank doesn't change that rate, it's a pretty reliable system. And that's how our society is able to launch a second currency or second economy based on this new currency, and players, citizens, can reliably exchange their currency one with another at any time. Furthermore, our society gives a different tax schedule for each currency. So if you take a look at our legal page, you can see that tax rates only apply to the minori. If you have currency in the tongbao, it doesn't get taxed using that law. You need to set up a second set of laws and a second set of demographics in order to establish a separate tax system for the second currency. So what did we do with having separate tax tables and separate currencies, pray, with our society?
Well, I'm scrolling down because it's quite a bit in the current system, but basically, well, as you can see here, we have different brackets set up currently, which mean that because I'm quite wealthy at the moment, I will be taxed quite a bit once I've actually put in the law for it. But yeah, basically for every 50k of currency, there's a new bracket topping off at 250k for Minori and 30k for the Tongbao.
But what we intentionally did with the second currency, the Regal in the past and the Tongbao in this round, is that when you have a higher value currency, what a government could do is create some sort of tax-free bracket for a minimum amount of the higher currency that you could create. So, for example, in the Tongbao, we have a minimum, or at least we designed that the first 10,000 tongbao that you save, or in our currency conversion to minori, the first 100,000 minori's worth of tongbao, the government will not tax them. So that creates an impetus for people to actually save up their extra minori into tongbao so that they get taxed less. This way, it creates not only a way for more minori to be freed up into the government treasury, so that people can use minori to buy other stuff at any time, but actually creates a way for people to save up money when you have a tax system. And we find that a lot of players actually sort of like that, because they do want to save up that money when given the chance. But when you have a tax system, that sort of goes against the grain, and people want to spend that money as soon as they can to get, for example, a bigger house, more blocks, or more food.
Yeah, true, and especially in my case, I sometimes actually need to pace myself a little bit because engineer is really investment heavy, which means that at the current rate, at least when I built my mechanics workshop, I had to spend about 400 to 460k Minori, and that's basically double what the highest tax bracket is. So I did have to yeah, spend it in increments just so I could actually afford to.
You might want to elaborate on that a little further, Prey. As an engineer, your first skill is basic engineering, which in other words means that you're the one who is responsible for paving roads, making our mechanical machinery, and so forth. You earn a lot of money because you make most if not all our roads off the bat, which means that you earn a lot of money right in the beginning. So when we set up our tax system, you actually get taxed almost the most. But at the time that you get most of your money is actually the time when we don't even have our tier 2 blocks yet, and your money just sits. So how was that experience for you in terms of building up or just trying to save for what comes ahead? Because then you need to buy a lot of iron to build things eventually into cars.
Yeah, well, that was what I was referring to a little bit because, yeah, well, even though the government actively pays for every single block I place, including the roads and all the other stuff, there is also the point of availability and the price per unit of all the blocks I'll need. And basically I had to pace a little bit the amount of money I made in a day versus the amount of money I would realistically expect to be taxed. So when stuff became available, I was pretty much going immediately to the people making the blocks so that I could actually yeah, spend it and have it in preparation for when I needed it.
And since a lot of people have extra money to spend, this round we've been seeing a lot more creativity going on with in terms of how to spend that money away, don't we? For example, Aquilarius, our co-host last time, has devised up quite a few ways to basically throw away his money in creative ways.
Yeah, well, that's actually these two loans. I believe he had larger amounts previously, but currently he has an angel loan, which is, as you can see in the title, actually aimed at new players, which has a 1k to 5k Minori loan you can take out for 10% interest. And you're expected to pay it back in half a day, which is quite acceptable actually, because you can earn it pretty quickly with just a few trees in our system.
And we've actually tested it, but if your loan or if your bond gets overdue, Eco will remind you about it, but it won't actually force you to pay it back automatically. So that's another thing about bonds and trust when it comes to our system. Not sure about what happens in 9.0, but the fact that it doesn't go back to the original owner automatically could perhaps be an extra twist in the story of eco worlds and systems.
Yeah, well, in the meantime, you could always just work with the reputation system. In fact, if you create a contract, you can already use the reputation, and you can always set like, okay, if people have 100 reputation or above, that gives some indication of trustworthiness and actually being able to pay back his loan, and that should also help reduce the risk the people loaning the money present themselves with.
Let's take a look at the Steam truck rental for Rubido. So Rubido is one of the trucks that we actually saw in the beginning of the video, the one that was next to me. Apparently it was public property. It belongs to not exactly Aquilarius. So what's that about?
Yeah, I'm actually seeing this for the first time now because I did hear about it, but didn't really see it in detail. But from what I can see, it's basically a way to actually rent the vehicle we saw in the beginning of the video. And upon completion, you do need to pay. At least that's the intention. But I think it's actually in reverse, because payment on completion means that the person renting it from him should get the money.
And yeah, I believe it's not for down payment or something. Interesting. So
That's actually
there
the
still needs to be
deposit.
some work on this menu, yes. But from what I heard, Rubito, that other truck that we just saw, belongs to not Acalarius, but something called Dwarven Industries. What's that about?
Yeah, that's actually one of the corporations we have, at least the second one of its kind. And that's basically a banding together of a couple of people in the southern town we have seen develop for pretty much the first time in this map. As you can see, it's pretty much occupied by the inhabitants or people who actively mine, and they share resources to a certain degree. And yeah, they agreed that one of the trucks they have can actually be rented out for people to use and enable them to earn money quicker.
So Dwarven Industries is actually a cooperative owned by several players. How did they actually do that? Why don't we actually show the process of how to start off a corporation or a cooperative?
Yeah, so this is actually the same building. What they did was create a Dwarven Industries title here, because that allows you much more flexibility as opposed to demographics. Because a registrar you can just go to and add and remove people at will, so you don't need the whole law system with its 24-hour waiting time and all that stuff, and you can just add and remove at will. And here we have
The bank.
Yeah, the bank. And there's actually my own corporate account here, which I'm using pretty much exclusively, which I'm the manager of. And Broom is one of my players, and she will be working alongside me, and basically all the engineering efforts will be pooled into one account, which means we share both the risk and obviously also the reward.
So by having joint accounts, coupled with groups that are being recognized on the registrar, we can effectively form financial and identity groups that can form the basis of what we now call a corporation or a cooperative. So why don't we go take a look at what they can do together with said cooperative?
Yeah, well, I mean, they can already use different bank accounts, so but let's have a look at the different town.
So Dwarven Industries has built up quite a factory for themselves. I thought you were supposed to start the mechanics factory in the capital. What happened in the week that, ever since our first episode?
Oh, yeah, I'll do a roundabout and give a small tour of the fountain I made last night. And we're coming up on my little box shortly. Previously it was, yeah, not quite like this, but yeah, I've expanded a little bit and actually formalized the car dealership a lot more, with a little bit of bay windows to give it really a much, yeah, much more.
It looks like the corrugated steel ones, except bigger, much bigger.
Yeah, I'm quite fond of it actually. Let me open the map real quick to actually show the map on the real estate desk as well.
I love it that when you open the mini map, you can see the world map expanding slowly as well. That's how you prove that the world map that you see on the real estate desk is actually real-time generated.
Almost done, and that's the way we go. A little bit of a hiccup because it started to
The trees
load
are
the
coming
trees
in.
and stuff.
There we go. So as you can see, the capital is still the capital. There's always this little chunk of random colors that's sort of in a box in the middle here. I like how it all gets clustered together into one neat little box. But then you see these streaks of brown going south and to the east. And then there's a north. And you can sort of see that there's more and more brown happening on the southern coast. And that's the new southern town, which we have formalized into Costa del Sol, I believe.
Yeah, that's actually the second town, which, in contrast to our previous efforts, actually developed into more of a proper town. And going forward, I hope they will actually have the ability to have their own local economy in addition to what the capital has. Which opens yet another layer of complexity to the economy, which also enables stuff like not only a public bank, which we have now with generally favorable exchange rates, but also have the opportunity to have private banks, which may or may not be for profit and have a different exchange rate and basically have foreign exchange.
Why don't we actually drive there and take a look for ourselves how this new town looks like?
Yeah, that's what I intended.
Let's go. I can't wait. So yeah, while we're driving there, let's talk about what are some of the challenges when working with this new town. Because as much as we wanted to set up a new town, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing. We had a couple disagreements over this past week.
Yeah, actually mainly because of the way the road was intended to be versus how it was initially actually made, which means that yeah, I had to smooth over some of the affected lots because basically.
So yeah, let's start off with let's talk about this south gate, which we're looking at here. In the beginning, the road for the south gate only existed. Whoa, what have you done here? For yeah, the original south gate actually blocked the original path because the original path is actually to something to on our left right here, and it took us a while for us to actually shovel away all the dirt involved to make the path you see here. What have you done, pray?
That was actually Bartleby, and I was about as shocked as you are when I saw it. So I was like, what the hell happened here? But basically it's to reduce the amount of ramps from what I've seen, and it's intended to smoothen it over. That's why some parts actually have a little bit of a hill still, while others are much smoother right now.
Ooh, asphalt.
Yeah, this was lower, so I had to just place it rather than dig up parts.
Yeah, if anything, roadworks are actually some of the slowest progression we have on a server as large as ours, actually. Because roadwork, seriously, is a lot of work. Don't force it on all in one person. They can't handle it. Always have at least 2 people working on roadwork, if not more. Especially when you've got 2 towns. So aside from road issues, what other issues have we had with the other towns? Because they're the desert one. They're the desert town now. In the past, in the last few rounds, the desert was the location of the capital. So with iron being mostly in the desert biome, we had local iron, but not in our case anymore. Our capital now produces mainly limestone for quicklime and wood for building purposes and some fuel. So, yeah, with the iron now mainly produced in this town of Costa del Sol, and specifically in this building called the Costa Outlet. Yes, and if you look at the authorization, it actually says Factorio. So yes, this Factorio belongs to the Dwarven Industries. This is the house that the corporation built. And if you take a look at the shop here, they actually deal in quite a lot of stuff. They buy iron ore, they make various tools, gears, and finished products. So we have quite a diverse range of products coming out from there. From storage solutions to equipment to building blocks and tools. But in any case, they're all metal.
Yeah, and I also noticed they put up concrete for sale, which will help for my asphalt production as well.
So pray, did you, I hear from you, move all your heavy equipment away from your own warehouse and now into the factory?
What do you mean?
Did you move your operations from the city to here?
Oh, no, I'm actually an engineer, so basically all we did was I pretty much made the components which the smith was purchasing in my car dealership, and in turn they used my assembly line to make the furnaces, which they subsequently placed in here. And you also see a crusher here, which is our garbage disposal unit, and also deals with the tailings, which from what I've seen is actually something which will be vanilla by the time 9.0 comes out, and this produces slag, which, much like real life, is actually used in our asphalt production.
That's a mod, but beginning in version 9.0 we will have actual slag, thanks to the original creators of this game, the Strange Loop game. Ooh, I see we have a rolling mill here. Hopefully we'll see corrugated steel happening.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it because yeah, it's actually one of the cheapest options for me to create a full tier 3 room, which will help as I'm moving into industry and electronics.
But of course, it's not the easiest piece of tier 3 building block because it does take steel, and that's not exactly the easiest thing to create, nor is it the most widely available material. Pray, what is this piece right here?
Yeah, that's actually why it's somewhat easier for us to create steel, because this is actually another mod by one of our staff members, Furchibald, which created this whole model of modeled after an actual kiln, which is actually an electric furnace, which in our case takes 1 kilowatts, which means that for every one of these, in the beginning you'll need at least one of the steam engines running, preferably by charcoal because of its lifespan, and this increases the amount of ores you can get, but with the downside, because it doesn't create tailings in the current form, you do need to offset it with some form of blast furnaces still, in order to actually keep on producing roads, which in my case I think it's pretty balanced, although I'm pretty sure we could add some more pollution to balance out the increased benefit it brings.
I would really love to see the electric furnace here to be like the blast furnace. It will require water to operate and actually creates pollution like the one we see up top. Of course, this game is actually very moddable, as we can see right now. And there's a lot of fun that you could do with modding.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So aside from simply creating a second town and having trade go on, it's not all fun and games. There are some times when you have disputes and disagreements. So, what are some of the disagreements we had with the other town? Well, I certainly had a problem with the idea of moving all the industrial action away from the capital and into this town. And we're noticing that a lot of our masons actually left the capital and started setting up operations here, effectively creating a brain drain.
Yeah, that's actually what surprised me a little, aside from some other aspects of more supply, which meant that in contrast to like the previous map, where I was pretty much the only mason producing mortar in any large quantities, now we actually saw more or less a price war, which means that although it was quite beneficial for me because, well, it was a major part of my road production, but the prices dropped quite drastically, which would be pretty bad if it wasn't managed too well, but it seems to have settled down over the last week.
Trade seems to be quite the double-edged sword. From the fact that we have different biomes, we can produce different commodities and goods, which is a good thing when trade happens, but it also creates competition. And when competition happens, we can talk about gaining or losing a lot of critical things. The most important of all being people, because a lot of people might choose to join another town because they feel that they can make better use of themselves, a better opportunity there, or that they want to be closer to their current products sourcing or whatnot. And we can see that the other town is already beginning to grow quite substantially. If you want to walk into their town, or should we drive?
I'm pretty sure their tunnel is drivable, but since it's pretty close, might as well just walk. I know
They've
where the truck
created
is.
a pretty interesting town here because it's pretty hidden.
Yeah.
It's this small little tunnel here, and then it connects itself to a completely different world.
Yeah, it actually kind of reminds me of what I had proposed at one time, which was a town inspired by Machu Picchu in Peru. And that was yeah, quite interesting to see that they created a secluded community surrounded by hills, which is more or less what I had in mind.
They're surrounded 3 sides by hills and 1 side by a forest. And then they have this little square here. You can see that the architecture in this place is very different from that of the capital. First of all, you can see that their buildings are generally 3 tall rather than 5 tall, because they don't have the same building requirements as we do. They still sport the MaiestasHaven flag, though.
Of course.
So this room is actually 5 high.
Yeah, and I see they put in one of my submissions for our contest for paintings, which is a tiger, and I'm surprised they didn't put in my dog, but can't have it all, of course.
Interesting beach photo.
Yeah.
It's also rotated by 90 degrees.
That's a point of contention between me and Fruitable. He insists it's actually the correct way, but you and I actually say it's flipped, and he says no, it's actually intended this way. So let's just say we agree.
Because it's an aerial shot, of course. So one thing we've been trying to do in this round is that you'll notice that a lot of people prior to the age of electricity like to light up their houses using torches and braziers. So as you can see, the light we have now is because Praetor is holding a torch. And you can craft torches easily through the beginning work table, but they do not actually last that long, so the better way to do it is to ask a mason and create stone braziers, or to ask a smith to create the same thing out of metal. Those things burn logs, coal, or boards, amongst many other wooden things. And they're usually considered the primary form of light prior to electrical lighting. Now, the other alternative is actually right here in front of us. Look at this really, really beautiful clay teapot looking thing here, and you'll find that's not a teapot at all. It's actually a source of lighting. This is the tallow lamp, and a lot of people are finding that they're not really using this thing because, first of all, it's a tabletop item or a small item that you don't really need to put on a solid ground. So in order to put it on this table, you actually need a wall behind it so they can bounce it off the wall. Otherwise, you can just put it on the floor. But what happens is it doesn't burn logs, it doesn't burn logs, boards, or coal. What it burns is tallow and oil. Tallow is produced as a byproduct from butchery or from cooking, or oil is pressed from flour, cereal germs, which is made from processing corn or wheat. Now, on our server, we also added some additional oil recipes, which includes things like pressing extra seeds to oil. And we have various recipes for those, including anywhere from tomato seeds to sunflower seeds to huckleberry seeds. In any case, the power and value of this tallow lamp here is the same as that of a brazier. You don't see a lot of other servers using the tallow lamp, though, is because of the rarity of oil and tallow. Most of the time we are having difficulty with even supplying enough food for a large server population, so let alone burning the comparatively more expensive tallow lamp with oil and so on. But there is a comparative advantage to using this. When you're using a tallow lamp, and if you fully load it with tallow, it can burn for almost 5 days. Meanwhile, if you load it with oil, with 200 oil, it can burn straight for almost 10 days. This is incomparable if you compare it with the stone brazier, which unless you load it up with coal, it won't burn for more than 4 or 5 days. And given its smaller profile and the fact that you don't need floor space to put a tallow lamp, it means that when you have a more advanced room, a more decorated room like this one, you can put a lighting source on another piece of furniture, like the small table or the table here, which I think is actually a very good solution for smaller rooms and maximizing use for the more furniture that you have. How about your space, Praetor? Do you think that every house should have a source of lighting? And if it is, how do people afford that lighting?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I'm pretty much content with using a torch, to be honest, but I do find that using a brazier, for example, in my straight box of a mechanics workshop, yeah, I do prefer just having a brazier and putting some coal in it and pretty much fire and forget it, rather than having to manually switch over to a torch in order to actually distinguish the parts of my workshop and see which components I need.
So what problems do we have with that idea this round, namely with coal?
Well, we do live in the grasslands, which means that coal is relatively available, at least in theory. But in practice, yeah, we've opted to mass produce them through garbage burning in the form of charcoal, which additionally has the added bonus of having yeah, stacks of 100 versus 20 of normal coal. Although it is a little bit unbalanced if we can just mass produce it that way, which means we have actually reduced the charcoal fuel value from the usual 20k down to 15.
So yes, we can see that a lot of houses are starting to decorate themselves now, although not every place is fully chalked up with furniture. So if you guys are interested, we can have another episode and talk about how to maximize room value legitimately, and what kind of designs make for good housing, and what makes it pretty and comforting and pleasing for all to see and to use.
Yeah, I mean, I did ask you to update it for me because, yeah, although I did place it relatively to my tastes, I did see that even though I had like plus 40 when I did it, as you can see in my bottom left, my house value is actually 63 just by adding a few more items and rearranging them. So it's definitely worthwhile to see what makes up a good room and how to maximize the amount of points each item gives.
There are several important factors when it comes to room design. Accessibility, which means that you can walk through it, and aesthetic, which means how pretty it looks. And of course, there's the technical requirements of generating enough or the maximum amount of house points it can get. Eco's current design basically has it so that you can only generate a certain amount of points with the same number of pieces of furniture, because each piece of furniture has a decaying value for every duplicate piece placed, or the same category that's being placed. And there's also a hard limit to, well, a soft limit actually, to house points it can generate through the type of material that's used in your room, or in other words, room tier. So here we have a standard tier 1 room, which when you have as a whole house together, you should be able to generate around 50 to 60 house points easily, if you have, say, 2 rooms of each type going on. With a tier 2 room, you can basically double that and have up to around 100 points. That's what you should be aiming for. And with Satsuki Tower, you saw at the beginning of the episode, I'm currently generating 111.7 points. So you should be able to go just a little above 100 if you have a place like mine, around at tier 2.1 or so. I intentionally don't go all the way to tier 3 because I actually really love how warm looking lumber is. And lumber is a relatively easy to acquire material now. And you can see with the previous town, as well as from all these roads, that stone and masonry in general is always high in demand and therefore always in short supply. So meanwhile, as a carpenter, I find that people are starting to buy less and less of the tier 2 lumber. Thankfully, in version 9.0, we will start to see official tier 3 and tier 4 wooden materials start to appear. But encouraging people to create better houses with better materials, as well as continuing to rely on different people, from the carpenter to the mason, and sometimes perhaps even the smith, to get different building materials, using them as a mix and creating pretty and very designed houses like these ones is very much a part of what makes Eco a great game for all.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
So we saw on the Eco Discord as well as the forums with people asking like what kind of materials should I be using for my house? Should I have a hewn log house? Should I have a stone house? And a lot of times people think that you can only use one type. And our answer to them is this: use everything. Even as a carpenter, I buy a lot of stone blocks. My roof is made from brick, which means that I have to buy it from a mason. My upper parts of the tower is made from plaster, which is a mod we have. And again, that's a bricklayer thing. So the pretty stuff, the prettiest looking houses are always a mix of both stone and wood. So we would like to encourage everyone who's playing Eco to have fun and use everything that you've got to create the most visually uh, provocative or evoking houses. For that is what creates and gratifies our visual senses and have bolster some creativity amongst our minds. So yeah, now that we have some sunlight, we can actually see what's inside here. And you can see that the garbager actually has a rather elaborate setup with the blast furnace.
Yeah, well, that is part of the multi-people setup they have, because not all of them are spec'd into the same specs, obviously. Like
So how many people are working in here?
from my count, there are at least 3 or 4 people, with one specifically designed for the whole garbage operation, which means actually all the tailings and stuff, which is exclusively handled by one person. There's one smith and 2 different types of masons, each focusing on a different aspect. One is currently more like mothering, and actually there's 3 masons. One is mothering, one is primarily for bricklaying, and another is actually ramping up cement production, which will be for our concrete and also, of course, the asphalt.
So the fun thing about extra high collaboration is that even within a single profession, such as that of masonry, most people would often first take mortaring and then take bricklaying. But for some latecomers, or if they want to do it for extra challenge, they take bricklaying straight and then have to rely on another person to get their mortared goods, for example, mortar itself, in order to do their work. So I think a part of the fun actually is relying on other people and having that kind of trade go across. And sometimes if they don't want to deal with the taxes, what they can do is set up a joint business like this establishment here. And this one is a very elaborate collaboration, as we can see. From masons to smith to engineer, they've certainly got it all.
Yeah, and one other thing which I'm sure we can show as well is actually addressing the problem, which is leapfrogging, or at least the notion that logging in late means that you're behind immediately and basically not being able to compete. Which I've actually taken steps to combat, not only because of words, but also well, because of the economy, and actually allowing people to earn money right away. That's definitely the most important part, and also using the credit part of the whole equation, which in this case means that the smith can easily actually rent out portion of their workshop for other people to use, which means that rather than using the rather inefficient bloomery, you can use the blast furnace right away, which means that you can start off with double the amount of bars per ore, which means that you can actually sell more and thus compete much faster. And in my case, engineering means that instead of having to invest about $500,000 in Minori, you can actually just enter my workshop and use it right away at a price of a few Minori per minute of crafting time, which means that although it will cut into your margin of profits, it will allow you to actually get started right away. And yeah, we can actually drive to our workshop, at least my workshop, and yeah, I can show you what I have set up, which pretty much enables any new player who wants to pick up mechanics and help us out. They can just join, grab the scroll from our library, and basically once they have a few K of Minori, which is about 1 or 2 threes, they can pretty much just get started on queuing up stuff and selling their own components, or heck, if they have enough iron on hand, they can just start and build their own truck from, let's say, day 1 or day 2, which is much faster than if you were to invest in all of that and yeah, start really from scratch.
So the building that we just passed by while turning that corner, that also belonged to Acularius.
Yeah, we can make a quick detour, actually.
So I see that he's been setting up a lot of different branches and companies. So what's that about? In the beginning, he was pretty happy just to have his home going, but after the home is done, you can build even more with small remote outposts like these. What's he up?
Yeah, well, actually, it's more or less a warehouse assisting in the logistics department, which means that although he will buy it for a little lower, that means that people who are in the immediate area, in this case the desert, although it's not currently being bought, they can just offload it onto here, and basically people who can use it again, like the mason or for instance myself for the roads, I can just go into here, which is closer than having to drive all the way to the town, and just pick up the stuff I need and save myself time, and of course the supplier saves himself a lot of time as well, because he has a closer location where you can sell his stuff.
Wow, it seems like that in this round we're seeing a lot of creative ideas for how to make money if you've got money. Also, it's great to see that we have little buildings popping up everywhere, and that we know that the place is being utilized or affected by human activity.
Yeah, well, that is the intention behind development as far as I can tell. Starting with 8.0, when resources became much more decentralized and you didn't actually have yeah, an incentive to just stay in one biome, and now it's just like, okay, if I need copper, I need to travel all the way to a boreal forest in order to actually have enough. Oh, shit.
Whoa!
It's okay, but it was a little bit of a gamble and didn't pay off, but oh well. But yeah, as I was saying, normally previously to 8.0, we had to pretty much everything in one biome, and you could just create one little town, and you could find iron ore, you could find all one certain kind of stone, and all the other ores when it downloads. Yeah, that's actually a bug with 8.3. Yeah, hopefully
With
that will
8.3,
increase.
Eco has gone back a little and started the chunk loading system, which is different from previous versions.
Yeah, but as I was saying, the ores actually are much more spread out, which increases the reliance on different biomes, which already increases incentive to create settlements in different biomes. Getting there.
I'm loading even slower than you.
Yeah, I do multitask right now with the client, the server, and actually streaming, but yeah, it's actually working quite well. But
So that's where you have your workshop.
yeah, I compressed it a lot because previously I had it in quite a big room, but yeah, because it's directly above my car dealership, which is below here. I compressed it quite a bit and just placed everything as close together without disabling myself from being unable to reach everything, which means that from what I could count, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is 5, so it's basically a 9 by 5 footprint which houses every single mechanic's workbench, and I also have enough room back there for an electronics assembly, and on the other side, which is here right now, I will be expanding into Tier 3, which will include such things as the electric workshops and also the robotic assembly line, which will last all the way up to endgame.
So yes, that's a pretty impressive project that you have here. How big is this whole building right here, right now? And technically, with a building this size, it's enough to basically supply for all the workstations and workplaces of an entire town, right?
Yeah, I mean, if I made much more floors, then I don't see why it wouldn't be possible. I mean, we could create something like one huge workshop which houses pretty much every single workbench in existence, and in that way just rent out or something and enable people to get started right away at a cost of like 20 minori per minute or something. I'm just throwing out numbers here, but yeah, I mean, it wouldn't get as much use as engineering, because most professions don't quite require quite a high investment, but I can see uses for other stations being crammed together as well. And yeah, basically
So eco does give a lot of freedom in terms of what people can do and how societies can be organized. You can, for example, create one big building where people can literally travel to for work, like say have a city work office building where everyone can spend their day collecting resources outside and then throwing it all into this one mega building for processing their goods, so that they don't have to ever create workbenches or their own industry. Or they could have it decentralized and create a town of many different small workshops. And either way, it can be very fun. And we can see here that you're creating something rather regal.
Yeah, it's actually more or less an adaptation or even improvement on the staircase I used in the palace build, which was fairly recently featured, or at least a screenshot posted in the news. And this is actually a little bit better than I wanted for the palace previously, because yeah, I do like my symmetry, and this allows me to have much more clear lines showing paths, rather than having a little the barrier here where it was previously. So basically you have the red carpets right away in the middle, rather than yeah, just put against the wall, for instance. It just looks better in my opinion.
This is a very fun build indeed, because in order to actually build up and have multiple stories, one of the first things you actually need to build is to have a staircase, so that you can actually reach up to the higher levels, and then you can extend your floor outwards from there. And same goes for even roofs. So if you look at a gabled roof, such as the one we're looking at with Bobby's Smith over there. So yeah, what he has there, that triangular thing, is called a gable. And in order to build a gabled roof, you need to have an attic. So technically the roof itself is half a floor. And you need to have a staircase up onto that floor, which we call the attic, and then build using roof blocks, continually zigzag your way up until until the 2 points meet with each other. That's how you usually build a typical roof, or a gabled roof. And if you want to have not just 2 sides slanting in, but 4, you can do that as well, which you can sort of see to some extent with, let's say, the clock tower uses a mix of both, and Satsuki Tower uses a mix of both.
Oh, let's have a closer look if we have the time.
Sure. And I believe that some people were also experimenting with this concept called a clerestory or clerestory. So if you take a look inside here, look up, you can see that it's a zigzag pattern. So the inside of this section of the roof is hollow. But if we follow the staircase up in here, this is, by the way, the clock tower where all the milling stuff happens. That's why we have so many windmills and water mills on this river. Now if you come up here, what I like to do with roofs is that when you start off, you can see there's actually 2 layers. Here we go. So the main frame of the building is down there. So the first layer, when you have a room 5 high, what you can do is sacrifice one of the outer layers and build a roof directly out from it. And for example, here you see 2 blocks, 2 tiles. And then I cover the second layer with 1 tile, and then one would sit right on top of the 5 by 5 frame down below. And then we can just cover it flat with another floor for the second floor, or you could have, if you look over at Satsuki Tower, the third one, which sort of finishes off the roof, and you can just keep going in a build like a gabled roof or a closed off roof. Or you could also use it to act as a wall or a base wall for the next floor. That's how I usually like to do things. So that has been a tip for building from Satsuki.
Yeah, I might actually consider a building tutorial, because for 9.0, in sharp contrast to this map, I will be resuming making a palace. And previously they were 80 by 55 for the 8.0 version, and last round was actually 90 by 65, which accounted to in the 5 to 6 figure range for blocks alone. And well, to give you a slight spoiler for 9.0, and Dennis, if you are hearing this, close your ears now. But yeah, I'm intending for a 112 by 91 for 9.0, which is based around the Amsterdam palace called the Paleis op de Dam, which is the royal palace built in the 17th century in the Netherlands.
So yes, for this round, we've had our so-called City Hall in Satsuki Hall, which is a 5 by 5 plot, which is shared by the research library and the bank, which we've seen. So for a functional or small government, that works. But beginning, say, and we don't have competing governments yet in 9.0, but beginning perhaps in Eco 10 or in future releases, we will see competing governments. So the size and shape and tier of the room that houses the government constitution actually matters in who is to become the world government. That's when creative minds and creative builders will become particularly valuable assets in this game when we want to talk about who is to have a better show of economic and creative force so that they become the world leader. The competition is truly on. So that basically covers it for this episode, would it be?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we did cover a lot of ground, and yeah, in contrast to previous recording, we fixed the audio and video, which means that Satsuki was actually gonna be audible this time, which is quite a bit of an improvement. And Yeah,
We've talked about the functions of the central bank and why it's important to have a big flowing currency that's also being controlled, tightly controlled by the government, tightly controlled by the bank, and why deflation is more scary than inflation. Then we've talked about corporations and owning joint business ventures with current tools available to each.
Yeah, and also yeah, our experiences with other towns and the way they have applied the current systems we have in relation to multiple towns, and a little bit of preview as to how we've actually set up our mechanics workshop to enable leapfrogging, which we hope will actually incentivize people to consider joining service later, just to be able to just continue rather than being forced into joining a new world.
Remember, Eco is only as fun as we make it. So this has been Satsuki.
And this has been Prefter.
And we are the administrators and your hosts for Talkin' MaiestasHaven. We hope to see you next time. So, be sure to hit that subscribe button and that bell icon for notification towards new episodes. And do leave a comment if there are any questions or any issues you would like us to cover in regards to organizing eco-societies or mechanics within the game. Until next time, this is MaiestasHaven.
See you.